Bonjour tout le monde. On était en train de négocier quelle langue je vais utiliser. Je lui ai dit on va parler en français. Comme ça, on équilibre un petit peu. L'arabe, français, anglais. Voilà, ravi d'être parmi vous sans trop tarder parce que le temps est très serré. On a, heureusement pour vous, vous n'êtes que deux, donc vous allez avoir 2-3 minutes de plus que les autres. Et nous allons essayer de respecter le temps imparti pour ce quatrième panel. Sans trop tarder, donc la question des migrants, des droits des migrants et au milieu la religion, les libertés religieuses de ces migrants dans les pays de l'Afrique du Nord en particulier, mais aussi dans différents pays du monde. Et j'ai avec moi deux grands spécialistes, deux personnes qui ont beaucoup travaillé sur cette question. Alors, je nomme dans un premier temps Monsieur Dr Paul Murray, qu'on appelle souvent Bishop Dr Paul Murray, et vice-président international des initiatives pour la liberté religieuse au sein de la Global Peace Foundation. À la Global Peace Foundation, vous dirigez les engagements mondiaux qui promeuvent la liberté de la religion, de croyance et de conscience en travaillant avec des gouvernements. Voilà, c'est l'essentiel du travail. Vous avez aussi, vous exercez plusieurs autres fonctions académiques et aussi religieuses. Merci d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui. Monsieur Eddie Acevedo, qui est un expert américain de relations gouvernementales et de la politique étrangère et de la sécurité internationale. Depuis janvier 2026, vous avez été nommé au poste de vice-président chargé des politiques et des relations gouvernementales au sein de ce que vous appelez aux États-Unis, vous l'appelez NEED, comment vous le prononcez? NEED. C'est National Endowment for Democracy, un des mots les plus difficiles à prononcer en anglais. Endowment, je ne sais pas comment. Dans cette grande institution, vous êtes chargé, entre autres, de la supervision du dialogue stratégique entre ce département, le Congrès américain et la branche exécutive de la diplomatie américaine. Voilà. Sans trop tarder, je reviens aux trois questions que j'avais préparées. Hélas, une intervenante parmi les trois ne peut pas être des nôtres aujourd'hui. Et donc, je vais me permettre de vous donner la première question qui était prévue pour Madame Renem concernant le début de l'inclusion économique et des droits pour les migrants. En Afrique du Nord, l'accès à l'emploi formel, à l'éducation, aux services de base reste complexe pour de nombreux migrants subsahariens. Je parle de tous les pays du Maghreb. Au-delà des obstacles juridiques, comment l'identité religieuse et culturelle influence-t-elle cet accès à l'inclusion socio-économique dans la région? Alors, pour vous relancer, Monsieur Murray, d'un point de vue diplomatique et non gouvernemental, quelles politiques ou initiatives locales au Maghreb ont montré des résultats concrets pour faciliter cette intégration?
Thank you very much and appreciate being here today. I'm going to speak on this particular question from my experience as a Peace Corps volunteer in the country of Tunisia. Because in Tunisia, it taught me that successful integration is built through partnerships. Governments establish legal framework, but local communities determine whether people truly feel welcomed and have an opportunity to contribute. You see, some of the most effective initiatives are those that bring together government, civil society, educational institutions, and faith communities around practical solutions. Language instruction, workforce development, educational support, legal assistance, and mentoring can help migrants become productive members of society rather than remain isolated on the margins. I also learned that trust is built through relationships, not policy alone. When local leaders invest in people, communities become more resilient. Fear gives way to understanding, and differences become opportunities for cooperation rather than sources of division. So ultimately, economic inclusion is about more than access to jobs or services. It's about recognizing the inherent dignity of every person and creating meaningful pathways for them to contribute to the common good. That is how stronger and more cohesive societies are built.
Thank you. Vous pouvez réagir.
Yes, thank you. I could not agree more with my fellow panelists. As a vice president at the National Endowment for Democracy, we're very honored to sponsor this IRF summit here today in Morocco. And as it was mentioned earlier, it's a very special time in America right now. We're celebrating our 250th. Morocco, as the first country who recognized the U.S., will always have a special place in our hearts. But one of the things that for Americans, the freedom of religion is enshrined in our Constitution, in the First Amendment, and it emphasized the importance and the priority that freedom of religion means for us. So it is no surprise that this is a high priority for Americans, the US government, and the National Endowment for Democracy. Ultimately, I think religion, cultural identity, plays an important role to either facilitate integration or cause division. And I think, as some of the earlier panelists had stated, sometimes the legal side of this argument and the legal protections may be there, but it's those societal norms and pressures that we have to fight against. America, we treasure the fact that we were a nation built by immigrants, and there are many immigrants in the United States. My family immigrated from the country of Nicaragua. They were forced to flee communism and persecution in Nicaragua, so they came to America. And they were welcomed with open arms. And just like me, a bunch of others have done similar situations. So for us, we believe in a pluralistic society, and we think that adds a lot of value to what we're trying to achieve. I think as we look at Africa, obviously in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of the migration we're seeing, people are fleeing persecution, whether that's religious persecution, whether that's civil war, whether that's terrorist organizations, but they are fleeing for a better life. And if you ask a lot of these migrants, their first option, their first preference is always to stay in their land. So if they're forced to flee, it is a very difficult decision to make. And I think it's important as we continue to comprehend what do we do about this? How do we make it better? One of the things that I think Morocco teaches us is there is a better way. And it's not theoretical, and it's not academic. Morocco actually shows us how it could be done. During our time here, we were honored to meet with the National Office of Human Rights and the mediator in Morocco, who explained to us how civil society and the government are working together to improve the lives of all Moroccans, regardless of faith, regardless if you're Jews, Christians, Baha'is, Muslims, and everyone here is working together through dialogue. And I think that is a testament to what should be replicated in other countries. And lastly, I would say, I think as we gather here today and talk about the progress that's been made, I think it's also important to recognize that we should work on not making the same mistakes we've made in the past. So for example, we in this region witnessed the ISIS genocide against the Yazidis and the Christians. We saw that, at one point there were over 1 million Christians in the Nineveh region. Now they're less than 100,000. We've seen that in Syria, there were over 2 million Christians at one point in Syria. Today, they are less than a few hundred. This is the reality that we are living in, and we got to work together to make sure these cultures, these identities, these people do not go extinct.
Merci beaucoup. Et pour ajouter peut-être quelque chose qui concerne le Maroc et que personnellement, je trouve que c'est une chance pour ce pays, c'est la question des migrants aujourd'hui et du traitement des migrants au Maroc qui permet au Maroc d'avoir la chance d'avoir de la diversité culturelle mais aussi culturelle. Et je crois que le travail qui se fait au Maroc est un travail extraordinaire que j'espère sera continué, sera renforcé par les institutions pour donner aux migrants tous leurs droits. Aujourd'hui, ils ont accès à l'école marocaine sans qu'on leur impose, par exemple, la question culturelle au niveau des écoles, mais aussi ils ont la liberté culturelle, religieuse, et je trouve que c'est une chance pour tout pays d'avoir cette diversité. Je vais passer au deuxième point, la deuxième question qui s'adresse à vous deux et qui concerne la question de facteurs de tension et facteurs de cohésion sociale. Si les divergences culturelles ou religieuses sont parfois perçues comme des sources de tension, la religion et la foi peuvent aussi être des leviers de solidarité et de rapprochement. Monsieur Murray, comment mobiliser, pour monsieur, c'est pour vous la question au départ. Comment mobiliser les acteurs religieux et communautaires pour déconstruire les préjugés et favoriser un sentiment d'appartenance partagée, notamment dans le cadre des pays qui reçoivent des migrants, comme c'est le cas aujourd'hui au Maghreb avec les communautés subsahariennes.
Thank you. One of the things I've noticed, and again, I'm going to say this from an American perspective, a lot of time when we talk about religious freedom in America, those abroad usually translate it to, oh, you all only care about Christians. And we've tried to get away from this false narrative, and that's why, you've seen from the U.S. government perspective, we have made sure to talk about the situation of the Rohingyas, the genocide against the Uyghurs, what's happening with the Baha'is. I mean, I think what I was really moved by the comments from the Baha'is and the Jewish organization, because it illustrates that is a testament on how we need to operate, right? That regardless of religious faith, we're all still working together to help others because we believe in the principles of religious freedom. One example, I'll get away from the region for a moment. I remember many years ago in Colombia, they were facing a lot of influx of Venezuelan migrants. And at that time, the president, Ivan Duque, was struggling on trying to figure out what to do. And what he did was he granted TPS for nearly 3 million Venezuelans, which was unheard of globally. And it had shockwaves, and it had a lot of domestic pressures on trying to bring in 3 million migrants into society in Colombia. And while it was controversial at the time, it ended up being the right decision to make. And today, all those people have been integrated. They're all part of the economic system in Colombia, and they are contributing. So I think it's important for us to look at the migration issue, not necessarily from a standpoint of fear, and fear that somehow new migrants will change our way of life, so to speak, but more as welcoming them from a standpoint of you can add new contributions to the work. And for us, like in America, we saw this during the World Cup. It was great to see many Americans and many folks from foreign countries be in America, and everybody was rooting for their own teams, rooting for other countries' teams. And sometimes I think to myself, I wish the World Cup was not every 4 years, because it's the only time that all these different cultures and societies come together for one common cause.
And I agree with you. Protecting marginalized communities requires moving beyond dialogue to deliberate action. Conversations have value, but they must lead to practical cooperation. You see, communities of different faiths do not have to agree on theology to stand together in defending human dignity, opposing violence, and ensuring that every person can live according to their belief without fear. Those are shared civic responsibilities. I've seen this firsthand through my work at the Global Peace Foundation. In communities facing religious and cultural tensions, we've brought together Christian, Muslim, and other community leaders not to debate their beliefs, but to identify practical ways to serve their communities together. Whether improving education, responding to humanitarian needs, or supporting vulnerable families, working toward a shared purpose builds trust that dialogue alone cannot achieve. You see, religious leaders are uniquely positioned because they are among the most trusted voices in their communities. They can challenge prejudice, model respect, mobilize their congregations to address tangible needs. Governments and civil society should view faith communities as strategic partners, not merely stakeholders. Let me finally say this. When faith leaders, community organizations, and public institutions work together around common values and measurable objectives, trust grows, tensions diminish, and marginalized communities are better protected.
Thank you. Dernière question, troisième pour vous deux, et je vais la focaliser sur vos recommandations. Je vais focaliser la troisième question sur les recommandations. Si vous devez recommander une action pratique et prioritaire pour les gouvernements nord-africains pour concilier la question des flux migratoires et de la dignité humaine, quelle serait cette action?
My recommendation is pretty easy. Come to Morocco. Do what Morocco's doing. I will say, it's very easy to, obviously talk about a lot of bad things going on around the world at the moment. But on the issue of religious freedom, I do feel like we're making a lot of progress. I look at, like Egypt, Ambassador Green mentioned Mama Maggie, very inspirational Coptic Christian that's operating in Egypt with the poorest of the community. A few years ago, I was in Bahrain, and we were walking the old city, and you walk by a synagogue that's been there over 100 years. You walk by a temple that's been there over 200 years. And it's fascinating to think that these structures, these entities have been around for a long time. Even in the UAE, they've built the Abrahamic house, where they have in the same structure a synagogue, a church, and a mosque. So I do think that there is some progress being made on this issue. It's just a matter of doing it in a way that is sort of integrated within society, not in a way that's just government imposing, so to speak, but that the people themselves open their minds to the positive aspect of this issue.
Thank you.
And I agree totally with you, and I would add that lasting solutions are ultimately built at the local level. This is what we see here in Morocco. Policies can establish a framework, but communities create a sense of belonging. And that's why governments should intentionally partner with civil society and their faith communities, which are often the most trusted institutions on the ground. These organizations understand the needs of their communities. They can help reduce fear and misinformation. They can foster relationships across cultural and religious differences. And they provide practical support that helps newcomers integrate with dignity and contribute to society. You see, when sound public policy is combined with local leadership rooted in service, responsibility, and respect for the inherent dignity of every person, migration becomes less about managing a challenge and more about building stronger, more resilient, and more cohesive communities.
Thank you very much. J'ai eu la
Hold on. So because we have a minute left,
You're giving it to him, though.
I know I am. But one quick comment that I'm going to say. In the U.S. Congress, we call this a point of personal privilege. We talk a lot about the freedom of religion, freedom of belief, and empowering the people to be able to have these protections, 100% accurate. One of the things we don't talk enough about is the clergy who are under threat in authoritarian regimes and what they are going through. And I want to say, I cannot do an IRF summit without talking about my native homeland of Nicaragua, where the priests were bloodied and thrown in jail and have had to deal with severe human rights violations, churches being destroyed. And I think those elements also need to be part of the conversation so that we're not just talking about sort of the parishioners, so to speak, but also those in leadership positions of faith that are also dealing with harassment and attacks.
Voilà. J'ai eu la chance de modérer un panel avec deux intervenants de qualité. Ils sont imposants. Regardez comment ils sont. Hein? Imposants déjà par leur physique, mais aussi par leur intellect. Et merci beaucoup d'avoir respecté le temps et d'avoir enrichi ce débat. Merci beaucoup.